If I could just make one more point. A generation from now, there'll be all sorts of technologies that none of us here know about, and that it's really our job to get to that next generation, all of us, to come up with these ways of improving, continuing to improve. And so, you know, maybe we're walking when we should be running, but let's open this dialogue up further and see if we can do that.
The lady here on the right.
What lady? Thank you. There's so much rich stuff here. We could talk all night long. So first, I'm going to ask two questions. The first will seem like a throwaway or an attack. It's not. It's really a real question. Where are the women? And then you can come back to that. Second is, Terry, I think you began to frame things in a way that fits maybe more my worldview. And it felt like the whole panel started with a very, very optimistic point of view, which I feel like I would be inclined to challenge if you hadn't kind of gone there yourself. But one of the things that I feel might be going on is that, let me back up. Most of you started with the notion of morals and an intuitive desire to do the right thing. I feel like sustainable investing is also partly driven today by identifying the opportunity in the bad. And to me, that's not a zeitgeist shift. That's another way of capitalism going in to gain value. So I'd love your perspective on that of, is that partly the case? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How do we further the shift so it's not about taking advantage of the bad? You can see lots of examples in the world of water and carbon and all of that, to doing the right thing, having it be morally based. And I know that's a slippery slope, ethics and morals and all of that, but hopefully I framed the question enough that you can get your teeth
Actually,
into it.
I'd like to have some examples of sustainable investing focusing on the bad.
Well, you put me on the spot. I'm not going to be able to come up with exactly, the names of companies, but we read a couple of terms ago Cary's book, and there was a whole discussion of water, and it seemed pretty evident that there's some companies that are identifying there's going to be a huge issue with drinkable water in the future, and entering that market to take advantage of that by providing products that will help serve a needy market. It's not necessarily driven because of a desire to tend to the common good. It's driven by the fact that there's an opportunity to make money.
I'll just bring up one. There are, as I said before, many different ways of investing. And so Parnassus, for example, in San Francisco, their approach to socially responsible investing is to try to find underperforming companies. Like they made at their website, you can see a story about Black Hills, a mining company, that they identified the opportunity of improving that company's operations. They were an early investor, they engaged with the company, they got them to change their practices. So that is a very viable strategy that can be used in that effect. And many of the large food and beverage companies are well aware of the water issue in the corporate suite. And so, for them, that creates opportunities, again, trying to find new sources of fresh water, but it's also a risk that needs to be mitigated. And, it's surprising, even Goldman Sachs's consumer research last year had a focus list of 3 companies with an enormous water issue. And Goldman Sachs's ESG research looks at, theoretically, a lot of things. It doesn't look at water intensity. So this is still the Wild West of sustainability, and people are still trying to figure it out, and that's an opportunity unto itself.
I'd like to respond to the women. Is this working,
Yeah,
Bill?
yeah.
I'd like to respond to the women's issue. At Calvert, we've created the Calvert Women's Principles. We ended up uniting with the United Nations, UNIFEM, to do a whole launch. We had Dell Computer and other major corporations come in and sign on the principles. We had many companies sign the principles. We also hired a woman, and she did nothing but go to companies and argue to have women and minorities on their boards of directors, and she's had a lot of success. So it's the kind of thing you just got to push and make happen where you can, and that's what we're doing about it. Just on the other issue, I don't care if you're a capitalist doing good or if you're a moral person doing good, as long as the result is doing good. So, there's different levels of maturity. And the reason I asked the question I did at the beginning is because I think we're in transition from assuming that, all the parts are separate and in competition with one another as our fundamental worldview, to a place where we're coming to realize that the universe is one indivisible whole and all the parts are connected with one another and fundamentally cooperating, just like the parts inside our body. We walk around live in a contradiction in this society right now in this room. Everybody in this room is thinking that all the parts of their body are cooperating for the one whole called my body. And John is talking to me as John. He's not talking to me as a coalition of a liver and a heart and a knee. He's talking to me as John. So he's behaving as if inside his skin he's one indivisible whole. But we walk around still in the culture operating as if the opposite is true outside our skins, that everything's in competition with each other for its own self-interest. Stephen Hawking, the great scientist, David Bohm, many scientists, Hans-Peter Dor, head of the Max Planck Institute, one of the major quantum physics research places in Germany, have come around to recognizing the oneness of nature. I was speaking to Casey before this. Rick Warren, the minister who's written the most popular book ever, what is it?
Purpose-Driven Life.
Purpose-Driven Life. I saw him on a financial show with a Newsweek fellow, and he's organizing a group of evangelical ministers who believe in the oneness of nature. This is happening, and it's going to be happening more. Why? Because it's a more mature truth. And I want to say one other thing about this. I want us to pay attention to the environmental movement. It's an excellent example of a modern form of nonviolent social change. And the method is identify a more mature truth. There was a person who identified that the earth was round, walked back to the village and said, "Hey, elders, I think the earth is round." Everybody laughed at her. But she was right, and she knew that someday every child would be born into a world where everybody knew it was round. Why? Because it was a more mature truth. All the truth that's available is in this room right now. But we as human beings have the ability to mature in our ability to understand it. There's a lot we don't still understand. But we do now understand that the universe is one thing. And so I lost my train of thought there. But the point I'm trying to make simply is that we're coming to understand this, and this is going to guide us in the future. The environmental movement. Thank you. I'm sorry. The point is that the environment, before 1950, nobody said that we have to consciously together manage the resources of the planet to survive. Nobody had that thought. Now, that's a more mature truth that the environmental movement has brought around, and more everybody's buying into it, corporate, non-corporate, whatever, because it is a more mature truth. The next major, more mature truth we need to get out there is we need to fundamentally cooperate to give priority to the common good in the business sector to survive, and that will happen.
I'd just like to quickly suggest that it might matter why businesses are doing what they're doing. I'd like to think that it doesn't, but if you are doing good because you are making profit over here and not because you care about the common good, you can be doing something on the other, or perhaps the zeitgeist changes again and it doesn't benefit the brand so much to be doing the socially responsible thing. If it's not founded in core values, then there's no stability there. So I would suggest that it matters.
I want to say two quick things. One, directly to your question about this panel and no woman. Laura Berry, who heads up ICCR as our executive director, was asked to participate but couldn't, and I jumped at the opportunity to. So there was not an effort to be an all-guys club. And hopefully we have all gotten in touch with our feminine side enough to satisfy much of the audience. To just add to what's already been said, there is strong movement within this field around looking at the economic model and the financial model that has been used in this country. And I think Terry put it eloquently, but others have written about it too. Hazel Henderson writes about economism as the sort of old way that we have looked at how we run the economy here. Is just the pursuit of money, blindly, just more and more and more and more, which is, fancy word for we're greedy. and that we now have to look at how do we manage these resources, that the economy does not exist divorced from nature. It doesn't. And so that's a view that's starting to take hold even among some of the corporate leaders that heretofore have been about the single bottom line profit. It's changing. Is it instantaneous? No. I think Terry just mentioned 1950 was sort of when we began to have some kind of an awakening around what the environment meant to the economics. It's taken a while to get us where we are now, and there's a whole convergence of things, including the polar ice caps, that have made folks suddenly sit up and say, maybe those folks 20, 30, 40 years ago had something going for them. We better pay attention because the resources are getting depleted. So some of those corporate leaders are getting the message as well. That's the A. The B part is that the children of some of us have grown up with this being their reality. And so those who might right now be 24, 25 years old, fast forward 10 years, and they're somewhere in the leadership ranks within a lot of these companies. There's going to be a big difference. It's just going to naturally be a big difference.
I think you've asked a very, very troubling question, and I want to acknowledge personally how troubling I find it. When we started out in this field, the basic line, and I certainly said it, was I didn't really care why an institution would incorporate environmental criteria or social criteria into their investment decision-making. I just wanted them to do it. Why didn't really matter. I have to say I'm rethinking that. I don't have a good answer, but I am coming around to thinking that there has to be a lot more allegiance to these principles than simply the use of data. This is a very, very real problem. Because you do have the danger of what's hot today is yesterday's meatloaf, or tomorrow's meatloaf. I mean, it's just, it was a long drive up here.
Okay, so who's got an easy question for us today? Sure.
Please, an easy one.
Well, I don't know how easy it is, but I'm the president of CSR Wire, and so I all day long see the changes that are happening. We have maybe 80% of our 4,000 members are corporate members, and they're working. I just came from the Clinton Global Initiative, and it was fantastic how everybody was working together. So I'm wondering if you have the next best thing that might be happening for these corporations in terms of working together, and maybe the stock exchanges helping them, demanding that they either work together or work more towards, I'm not so sure it's the greater good, because I'm saying that I see that they're getting pressure from the consumers. They're getting competition among each other. They need another method of being measured, I think. And so I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that.
So, Cary and Peter, your two firms collaborated on one of the first major rankings that any of us think held some water, the Newsweek Green 500. Is that a starting place that we can go from?
It was a great effort, and it will continue, and it will go global. So I think the next step is, because they were U.S. rankings, and they will go global. But to your question about what's next, I was at 2 UN events over the last few weeks. One was about sustainable stock exchanges. So there is a global movement. It's succeeded in Brazil. It's succeeded in South Africa, and NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange compete with each other. So when will one of them understand that, having an ESG component and a separate category where companies qualify for having the right behavior, and then that encourages capital. We have a race for capital. It encourages efficiency. So that's one exciting thing. Another exciting thing, Sir Mark Moody Stewart, former chairman of Shell of all people, chaired an event at the UN.
The last good chair of Shell.
Yeah, exactly. Well, anyway, I'm not here to judge any company, but responsible investing in conflict-afflicted areas. And they're using the Sudan as an example of how responsible investing and empowering the local corporates can actually foster positive change in a war-torn region. And how can that region recover more quickly post-crisis using that mechanism? So there's an opportunity here to expand what we've been doing to countries like the Sudan, and then after that, hopefully Myanmar and the Congo.
One of the pieces of this that we do a lot of work at VERIS, and we're in a partnership with KLD around a lot of this. We've built a sustainable investing platform for more than 10,000 mainstream advisors. The next big breakthrough that we want to see is to bring this kind of the social and environmental impact reporting onto people's financial statements. You all get some kind of financial statement from a mutual fund, from a financial advisor. All or most of you get financial statements. And even from those of us that are in this field, you don't get a financial statement from us that has really given you quantitative information about the environmental, social, governance, sustainability factors that your investments are affecting one way or the other. So it seems to me that when we can start reporting on that data, and I think we're getting closer and closer, and we can start bringing this onto a financial statement, is the sooner that we're all going to start seeing how relevant it is to making financial decisions, and how comfortable you are with the portfolios that you own, one way or the other. No offense to all the great work that goes on in advocacy and the NGOs do, but that's not the whole story. It's a critical component of the story, but to date, it's been the only story which this industry has been able to tell its shareholders. And what we now need to say is, if I own this portfolio, what's the impact on global climate change? What's the impact on water resources? What's the impact on employees and the communities they work in? When we can start doing that, and that becomes transparent, then we're going to affect this change in profound new ways. And when those impacts begin to become integrated into the gap reporting, and corporate reporting actually starts bringing this onto corporate balance sheets and income statements, when this starts to synchronize, we get better and better transparency and more opportunities to beat the race with death that we're in right now with our economy, which it's your questions and John's questions are all really deep and important questions. So I'd like to take another question at this point.